Well, we begin a new series this morning entitled Reconstructing the American Dream. And just a point of clarification as we get into this, I recognize there's an awful lot of political debate going on in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. And this discussion in this series has virtually nothing to do with any of that. It has to do rather with the fact that those of us in America, those of us who grew up here, have grown accustomed to what we probably thought was the American dream. You know how it is. We own a home, we have kids, they grow up, and before long, our life is spent, and we're not really sure what we were counting or what was important. And all of a sudden, for all of us, about 6 weeks ago, time kind of stopped. And for a moment, if you were saying 7 or 8 weeks ago or a year ago, man, my life is so busy. I just wish I had a moment for it to stop so I could readjust and do something. Then you've had your moment, right? When we think of the American dream, I think at least as we apply it, it covers two things, at least in the world in which we live. One is our security. Most of us have felt comfortable in the fact that we lived in a country that provided for us some of the best health care in all of the world. Yet all of a sudden, hospitals can't keep up with the patients coming in, and our security is shaken. We also have known wealth, tremendous wealth, and so we've grown up in that environment thinking there is security in the wealth, but in a week, Wall Street did a number on your retirement plans, and all of a sudden your security is shaken. There's not only security, I think. Part of the American dream was the fact that we can do things as families, and we engage in scheduling more and more and more and more, and even the church can be responsible for that at times. But as our families, we load our kids up in multiple sporting events and dance classes, and all of a sudden we are scheduled clear up to a way we can't even fathom. Think for a moment about this. All of that stopped and changed in just a heartbeat. In fact, a number of years ago, I was in a car accident, and my memory and recollection of that was that while the accident was happening, time kind of stood still. I saw things go past me from the back seat into the front seat, kind of in slow motion. And a friend of mine who understands that process told me that what was really happening is that when something happens really, really quickly, your mind and your eye can't compensate, so your mind starts to drop out certain things out of your vision, and instead you see other things go by, as it were, in slow motion. To me, the quarantine is like a car accident in the middle of the American dream. It allows you to all of a sudden stop and say, how will I reconstruct this? How will I look at life differently? So I've been pondering that and thinking about that. To lean into a statement by Albert Einstein, he reminds us, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. In other words, Einstein was saying, listen, you thought that only the things you're adding up count, but guess what? There are certain values, certain things that you have that you can't really count, but they really do count. In fact, I was pondering that this week as I was thinking about something that had never occurred to me, and frankly, in all of my life, as both an American as well as a Christian, no one has ever brought this to my attention. You know the statement from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That means we know these things to be true. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's a statement I'm sure you've heard. Maybe you memorized it as an elementary school child. Maybe you learned it. Maybe you studied it. Here's the point. I don't think my entire life anybody has said, wait a minute, if the Creator gave you those gifts, why did He give them to you? And not only why did He give them to you, but how are they to be used? You see, I think a portion of the way we thought about the American dream was that there are rights after all. It's my life, I'll spend it how I want. They're my freedoms and my liberties, I have them, and if you choose to violate my freedoms or liberties, I'll stand up and scream about them. And after all, I should be able to pursue happiness in any way I want to. But here's the question. The Creator gave us these rights. Why did He give us these rights? And how should we spend them? And for the first time this week, I was thinking, these are words, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, or delighting in the Lord. These are words that the Bible talks about. Like, think about this for a second. We have God saying, oh, by the way, the founding fathers did get this portion right, that I gave you certain rights. And these are words that are found in the Bible that you and I could say, what does the Bible actually say about those? So as we start this series, we just want to stop by saying, let's kind of deconstruct the American dream before we reconstruct it. And here's what I want to teach you about those three words. I'm going to give you the ideas in advance, and then we'll look at the scriptures together. Here you go. Your life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Your life was meant to be given away. That's right. Your liberty was meant to be used for others. You're going to find that in the scriptures. And finally, your pursuit of happiness is best found in service to the Creator. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Why did God give them to us? And how are they to be used? Now let me start with that first idea of life, okay? Remember I said you can find these words in the scriptures throughout, so let's look at them together. John chapter 10, verses 9 through 11, this is what we read. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. For this reason the Father loves me, verse 17, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. In other words, Jesus said, listen, your life is meant to be given away. Jesus models that for us. You say, well, that was Jesus. That's not me. Hold on. Okay. Take a look at what Jesus says to us back in Matthew chapter 16. Then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? Jesus had it right. He said, here's the thing. You need to understand, God the Creator gave you life. He gave you life not that you could spend your 70 plus years on this earth on yourself. The Christian message is this, that you and I were given life, that we might live that life out and spend it for others. Now here's the thing. You can't really do that unless love ultimately is motivating you. Unless the love that you have for others motivates you to love them more than you love yourself. In fact, you may have heard me mention this before, but years ago, before my wife and I got married, my aunt gave her a statement going into the marriage. She said, Kim, you will like Phil because of, but you will love him in spite of. Love is the unbelievable motivation that says, I don't love you because you're something. I actually agape love, a willful love. I love you in spite of who you are. That's exactly what God does with us. And so therefore, when it comes to this life or your life, we are asked to love others more than ourselves. When love motivates you, you will be able to give up your life, and I just want to talk about this in light of your choices, your attitudes, and your actions. Here we go. Your choices. When love motivates you, your choices will be determined before the opportunity presents itself. When love motivates you, your choices for the other person will be determined before the opportunity presents itself. You say, where do you find that in the scriptures? Look back with me at John 10 again. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Now note this. John 10, verse 11, Jesus speaks that. But John 10, verse 22, we are told at the time of the feast of dedication that took place in Jerusalem, it was winter, which means that Jesus is in the final year of his life. This is the winter of the previous year. But by the Passover, the spring of the next year, he will die on the cross. Yet here he is saying, clear back here, months earlier, given the opportunity, I will lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus makes a decision before he actually has to make the decision. That's why we say it this way. We say that your choices will be determined before the opportunity presents itself. In other words, you need to be thinking now about loving others well, not just think, well, when the opportunity comes, I'll do it. Years ago, a friend of mine gave me this little statement. He said, a conviction is making a decision about a decision before you ever have to make the decision. That's an easy one to remember. It's not in your notes, but it's an easy one to remember, and all you need to do is just remember the word decision. A conviction is making a decision about a decision before you ever have to make the decision. If you wait until the very moment where you're tempted and now you try to make a decision, you're late in the game. But if you've made the decision about the decision before you ever come to the decision, then you have a conviction. And I think love as a conviction helps us say, given the opportunity, I am looking for ways proactively to give my life away. I'm not looking for ways to hold on to it for myself. Here's the second idea. When love motivates you, your actions will reveal a willingness to sacrifice your wants for another's needs. When love motivates you, your actions will reveal a willingness to sacrifice your wants for another's needs. Now, in John chapter 10, we see the same thing because Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. He's going to lay down his life, right? He has the right to hold on to his life, but he lays down his life. In that same passage, Jesus speaks of the hired hands, the one who isn't the good shepherd, who runs when the wolves appear. Why? Because the hired hand is more interested in what he wants than the sheep's needs, the flock's needs. Here's the same picture. The hired hand runs because he's more interested in what he wants. John says the same thing, by the way, over in 1 John 3:16. He says, by this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. See, there it is. What do we do with the life? We have this unalienable right, our life. And what do we do with that life? We lay it down for another. It is not right for someone to take that life from us, but it is right for us to willingly surrender it for the sake of others. In fact, Jesus said, just like I laid down my life, you should lay down your life. Now, most of us will never have the chance, I don't think, to die a martyr's death for the Savior. But every day, in all of our relationships, we can die little martyr's deaths. We wanted something, we sacrifice it for another's needs. We desired something, we planned for something for ourselves. We all of a sudden see someone else with a greater need and we give it to them. We look for opportunities to give to those who are in need. Years ago, when Kim and I lived in California, we had a friend of ours there and an elder in the church that we were at, where he was making trips into Russia. And I remember our young marrieds pastor, this was a long time ago when we were newly married. Our young marrieds pastor said, Phil, every time Bob goes to Russia, I want to give him a Bible, or I want to get him a coat, or I want to get him a big hat because it's cold over there. But I know that if I buy him anything, or if our young married group gets together and buys him anything, he's going to get to Russia and he's going to give it away. That's right. Because when someone loves other people, whatever they have, whatever they want, they end up sacrificing that when they see others' needs. Now watch this. In 1 John chapter 3, we see it even in more detail. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? In fact, the question is this: God's love does not abide in him. That's precisely the point. The love of God does not abide in that individual. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Let me give you a chart, and I want you to think through this with me, if you will. Here it is. Just for a moment, understand what we have in the American dream and what the rest of the world has. In fact, you'll notice in this chart that the United States roughly maintains 30% of the world's wealth. That's right, 30% of the world's wealth. Yet we are the third largest nation, and we're way back from China and India in this, in population. 30% of the world's wealth is in the hand, are you ready for this? Is in the hands of 4.25% of the world's population. That means we in America comprise 4.25% of the world's population. And yet we have 30% of the world's wealth. We have roughly 329 million people in America, and yet we have 30% of the world's wealth. Now let me draw a couple of comparisons from that, if I could, for you. Indonesia is our next closest neighbor in population. They have 270 million people. Yet the islands of Indonesia, are you ready for this? They don't have 30% of the world's wealth. They have 1/2% of the world's wealth, which means part of the American dream is that we have so much. But the question is, like Jesus said, We should be laying down our life for others as believers. Therefore, what are we doing with that 30% of the world's wealth? Let me compare us to India for a second. India maintains 18% of the world's population, yet they have 3.5% of the world's wealth. Think about it. America has 4.25% of the world's population, yet we have 30% of the world's wealth. India has 18% of the world's population, yet they have 3.5% of the world's wealth. Or consider Africa for a moment. The continent of Africa contains 16% of the world's population, 4 times what live in the United States of America. And yet, only one nation makes the top 10 in population, and yet only a handful of African nations, not the continent, make the list that compiles those who have wealth. In fact, if you had grown up in Africa, the vast majority of Africans make about $5,000 a year. That's roughly $90 a week. Can you imagine living on $90 a week? Now you say, Phil, I don't know where this is going. I want you to think about this for a second. You have been given rights, certain rights. Among those rights are your life, the things that you have in your life. Jesus says we're to be giving up our life for others. And love motivates us so that even though we see things we want, we give up things we want when we see others who are in need. Here's a great idea for you. If you and I maintain 30% of the world's wealth, could we not think about children in India, about children in Africa, in ways that we could participate? Hey, a number of years ago, Compassion International brought their trailers here, and we had a walkthrough of what it was like to live in some of those other countries for children. It's right out here in our parking lot. It was a wonderful thing. We walked through that with our family, and at the end of that, our kids decided that they wanted to pick up an individual, the child they wanted to sponsor. We began to sponsor a child all of those years ago for about $30 a month. You ready for this? Some of you have already saved that kind of money by not going to Starbucks for a week when you've been at home. And yet, think about it. All you would really need to do for $1 a day is support and sponsor a child. For some of you, God might be asking you to do more than that. What if he's not asking you to sponsor a child? What if he's asking you to adopt a child, right? To actually learn of the needs of children in other parts of the world. You say, well, Phil, we're too old to adopt a child right now. Hey, listen, there's families in our church who have done this, and we have a family in our church presently who is in the process of adopting a sibling, a family group, 4 children out of Colombia. Think about this for a second. 4 children in Colombia who are all brothers and sisters, but have no parents and have no other relatives to care for them. You could maybe help in that regard using some of the 30% of the wealth that you and I have, of the world's wealth, in helping someone adopt a child. You don't need a program or a system to begin to say, God has given me my life. How will I use my life? Remember, the brakes stopped on the American dream. And everything kind of in slow motion went past you, long enough for you to say, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my wealth? And what am I doing with the circumstances and my scheduling and everything that goes on around me? Is this the best use of what I can do with my life? There's one more there for us to consider. Here it is. When love motivates you, your attitude will reveal that giving of yourself is a privilege, not a burden. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, this is what we read. We're reminded by the writer of Hebrews that we should be keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Jesus saw the opportunity to give up his life as a privilege, not a burden. It's an incredible thought that Jesus wasn't looking to carry it as a burden, but he did see it with joy as a privilege. Think about this with me for a second. The quarantine has allowed many of you to begin to come in closer proximity with your family. That's a cool privilege. it can also at times feel like a burden. Dads, are you helping pick up some of those domestic responsibilities at the home? You say, well, yeah, I have, and nobody's noticed that I have. Okay, then what you need to know is that in that moment, it is shifted over to burden. You're serving, but as a burden, not as a privilege. A friend of mine used to say the greatest challenge of being a servant is being treated like a servant, not being noticed, being ignored. Keep doing what you're doing, but count it as a privilege, not as a burden. Moms, with all of the kids home and still trying to manage work and everything else that's going on in your world, are you still serving there with joy and with patience? It's a great opportunity to say, listen, this part of my life is revealed in my attitude. If I'm not careful, it becomes more of a burden than a privilege. And kids, if you're listening in this morning, how are you doing on that regard? Like, are you obeying mom and dad quickly with a joyful spirit? Or is there grumbling and griping and complaining all the way to the other room? Here's the thing. Your attitude of giving up your life should be seen as a privilege, not a burden. Now let me take you back to that passage real quickly again in Matthew chapter 16. Remember what Jesus told his disciples? If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. In fact, it prompted Jim Elliot to write back in the 1950s, he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. This is the truth about the right of life that God has given you, that it was meant for you as a believer to give it away to others, to see what you wanted and sacrifice what you wanted for another's needs, to think in terms of living your life for someone else than yourself. Jim Elliot, with 4 other missionaries, would travel to the forest of Ecuador, and there in Ecuador, they would attempt to share the gospel with the Auca Indians, only to lose all of their lives. 5 men would die at the hands of the Auca Indian spears in attempting to share the gospel. But he was right. He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep, that is your life, to gain what he cannot lose. It's a great reminder. So there you have it. When love motivates you, your choices will be determined before the opportunity presents itself. Your actions will reveal a willingness to sacrifice your wants for another's needs, and your attitude will reveal that giving of yourself is a privilege, not a burden. Now let's talk about freedom for just a second. Galatians chapter 5 gives us that word. Remember, our life was meant to be given away. Your liberty was meant to be used by others. Verse 13 of Galatians tells us this, for you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters, but don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. For the whole law can be summed up in this one command, love your neighbor as yourself. But if you are always biting and devouring one another, watch out, beware of destroying one another. So here's the truth. We are to use our freedom not for ourselves, not to say, okay, I have these liberties, but we are to use them for others. In fact, the word freedom there is the Greek word eleutheros. It means free from restraint or obligation. In fact, it's used several times in the Bible. It's used to be free from the restraint or obligation of the law as satisfying God's righteousness. That's what's taking place in the book of Galatians. It's used to be free from sin. That's what Jesus is saying in John 8:36. I have set you free from the law of sin. It's to be free from slavery. In John 8:33, the religious leader said, we've never been in bondage to anyone. So the word is used to speak of being free from something. But I love this. The Nelson Study Bible renders it, a person can be tempted to view freedom in Christ as a selfish opportunity for the flesh. In other words, an opportunity to do whatever one wants to do. But Paul points out that true Christian liberty is the freedom to serve one another in love. What the Study Bible is saying, it's reminding us of this truth, that you and I are given an opportunity to do whatever we want to do. That's freedom. But we can also use that opportunity, that freedom, to serve one another in love. In fact, think about it with me this way. We live in a first world country. Freedoms expand in a first world country because of collaboration of time and wealth. Let me see if I can explain that. So rather than think politically about what your freedoms are or what they're being taken away from you, just know this, that you have a host of freedoms because you live in a first world country that someone who lives in a third world country doesn't have. Let me give you a few of those. The way that time and wealth interacts is money saves time and time saves money. And let me show you how that works. First of all, you didn't have to manage a garden. You can choose to manage a garden if you want to because you like organic vegetables. That's up to you, okay? But here's the thing. Our congregation is not out laboring all summer long in an 1.5 acre plot of land because we have to have that to survive. Because we earn money and we go to the grocery store, and that saves us a lot of time having to develop all of those things on our own. Or you drive to work when you used to go to work. You drove to work as opposed to walk. That saves you a lot of time. See how the collaboration of wealth and time grants you freedoms that you otherwise wouldn't have. Or just think about this. Fast food, McDonald's, fast shopping, Amazon, fast home renovations, Home Depot, fast entertainment, binge watching Netflix. All of those things save you time because you have the wealth to purchase those things. In a first world country, freedoms expand because of the collaboration of time and wealth. Now, with that in mind, let me introduce you to 3 characters in the Bible. 3 characters who all had the same freedom. They all could have done the very same thing. And yet 2 of them did not use their freedom for the other, but used it for themselves. And only one used his freedom for himself. In fact, I'll be reading from Luke chapter 10, and if you just want to remember where this story is told, I always remember it this way. The Good Samaritan is told in the story in the Gospel, Luke chapter 10. Okay? So here's the story, and it goes like this. And behold, a lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said, What is written in the law? How do you read it? Jesus is arguing that the man might know that he isn't really keeping the law. And he said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, Jesus said, You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. Jesus is saying, listen, you're not going to be able to do this on your own, but if you think you can, you're going to discover that you can't. You're going to need God's help to do it. Here we go, verse 29. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Now, we're going to be introduced to 3 people who face 3 different issues together. Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed him, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. In other words, the priest saw him and stepped away from him. He wasn't going to get involved. Yet, please know this, the priest had time, and he had means or wealth more than the man who's broken. Verse 32, So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he used the word, he had compassion. He used his freedom in a different way. And he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring oil and wine. And then he sent him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took 2 denarii, or 2 silver coins, and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will pay it to you when I come back. Jesus asked the great question, Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And the man said, The one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, You go and do likewise. In other words, Jesus said, here it is, the most neighborly thing to do is to take your freedoms and use your freedoms for someone else, not on yourself, but to share them with someone else. Whatever you have, whatever the collaboration of time and wealth has given you in freedom, use that freedom for somebody else. In fact, go back and look at this statement again. A person can be tempted to view freedom in Christ as a selfish opportunity for the flesh. In other words, an opportunity to do whatever one wants to do. But Paul points out that true Christian liberty is the freedom to serve one another in love. Here it is. Your life was meant to be given away. The right of your liberty or freedom was meant for you to share it freely with others, to be used by others. And here's the last one. Your pursuit of happiness is best found in service to the Creator. Psalm 37:4 says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Let me walk you through that with an idea. Here it is. Remember I said, all my life, I'd never really paused to think in terms of what these rights that were given to me as an American citizen, how the Bible described them, how they were supposed to be used, how I could shape the American dream in light of the rights that the Creator had given me. We've looked at 3 of them, life, liberty, 2 of them. We're about to look at the 3rd one, pursuit of happiness. And I just want to challenge you with this thought. Have you ever considered, when you knew you had the right of your life, to your life, have you ever considered how it was to be spent? Why the Creator gave it to you? When you thought of the fact that you had certain rights and certain liberties and certain freedoms, have you ever considered how you would use them, how you would spend them, as opposed to just argue that they might be taken away from you? And finally, in the pursuit of happiness, have you and I only pursued what the culture presented to us as what we thought would make us happy, and it only made us more tired? Like we grew weary under trying to keep up the pace. We grew weary under trying to keep up with the expenses. That doesn't seem like the pursuit of happiness to me. What if the pursuit of happiness was not in about keeping more, but keeping less, finding a way to share and give more? Here's the statement. Think about it. When you begin to see your life as a gift to be given away, your liberty as a means of serving others, and your pursuit of happiness will change. You will find your greatest joy in serving the Creator by serving others. C.S. Lewis captured it best when he said this: "Our desires are not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures fooling around with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea, we are far too easily pleased." It's a great statement. It's a reminder to all of us that we think we are chasing what will satisfy. But in truth, it's not that our desires are too strong, but they're too weak. The one thing we should be pursuing is delighting in our Creator. And that is best expressed when we learn those first 2 commandments, to love the Lord with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourself. Job said it this way: "If you give up your lust for money and throw your precious gold into the river, the Almighty Himself will be your treasure. He will be your precious silver. Then you will take delight in the Almighty and look up to God." And Jesus said the same thing in Matthew 5. "Therefore do not be anxious, saying, 'What shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear?' For the Gentiles seek after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added on to you." It's a great reminder that you and I should engage in this wonderful truth that for each of us, the pursuit of happiness is about loving God and loving others well. It's not about the things that we thought would make us happy. It's not about chasing the old American dream. It's about reconstructing that dream so that all of our rights, our life, our liberty, and our pursuit of happiness are spent in the care of the Creator. Love God and love your neighbor well. I know that for some of you, maybe time has stopped for a little bit, and you've started to say, "Phil, when this all goes back to a semi-normal again, I don't know that I want to do it the old way." I want to challenge you to go deeper on that thought. Don't just enroll everybody in everything because that's what everybody else seems to be doing. Pause selectively and say, how does this help us use our life in a way that we can give it away? How does this help us use our freedoms and liberties, not so that we could sign up for every single event that we possibly could, but how can we use our liberty in the sake of others? And how can we pursue happiness found in the service of the Creator That is, loving God well and loving others well. A number of years ago, I can remember that our church sent a team down to a third world country to serve and to help rebuild houses. And I remember being there with a group of guys, and my oldest son was with us, though he was only 14 at the time. And I remember being there together with those guys and not hearing once a burden, an anxious moment about something that was happening somewhere else. We were all living there in the moment, and there wasn't complaining, there wasn't griping, even though there were no warm showers, there were none of the things that we were used to having. But we surrendered all of those and found incredible joy together as a body of men building homes for someone else. It was like the pursuit of happiness, the way that the Bible describes it. Finding delight in the Lord by serving others. You say, well, Phil, I can't do that with my whole life. I'm a businessman after all, and I have other things to do. Let me encourage you with this thought. What if, in deconstruction of the American dream, you reconstructed it differently going back? What if you considered someone like John Wanamaker as your model? John Wanamaker was a wealthy businessman. In fact, you probably know him as the Philadelphia guy, right? Who came up with the Wanamaker department stores. What you may not know is that while he did that on the business side, he managed bringing children together at Bethany Presbyterian Church, a situation where he brought children together who didn't have a place to go learn the Word, and those children numbered in the thousands. John Wanamaker didn't only fund to have them together, but he was hands-on in the involvement. At one stage, there were 4,000 plus children coming to that Sunday school event that he would do, and John Wanamaker, you ready for this, is reported to have known them each by name. Wow. Can you imagine? Here's the thing. The Wanamaker department store closed a few years ago. It's just a name now. It's no longer even in business in the way that you would have known it that way 100 years ago. But the lives that were touched by the children he invested in, those decisions and determinations of faith have probably borne generations of believers. Because John Wanamaker didn't see his life as to be spent for himself, but rather spent on others. It's a great time, because the dream has been deconstructed, to reconstruct it in a different way. Here's a couple steps we want you to think about today, and take a snapshot of this, or you can find it on the Bible app there, because remember, today at the close of the service, we're going to head to those Zoom rooms. You can join us there. We won't close the service in the same way we normally did. But here's some steps I want you to think about. What steps can you take to further development kingdom values? That is, that we would seek first his kingdom, that we would take all of our rights and say, how can I seek God's kingdom first? Here they are. Your life was meant to be given away. Your liberty was meant to be used for others. Your pursuit of happiness is best found in service to the Creator by loving God and loving others well. We want to encourage you to do that today. We're going to sing, I think, here. And as Justin comes, just let me challenge your thinking one more time. Don't lose this window of opportunity. Use it as a time of evaluation. How are you doing on pursuing kingdom values? That is what God would have you do. Or are you pursuing only personal values? That is what your kingdom looks like. One kingdom has a capital K. That's God's. One kingdom has a small k, that's yours. I would encourage you, render your desires, your pursuit, your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness to what God would have you do with it, not to simply spending it on yourself. We want to reconstruct the American dream together. Thank you for joining us.